My mother-in-law thought I wasn't paying attention when she slipped something odd into my drink. She smiled sweetly and called it a special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law. I smiled back, said thanks, and quietly swapped glasses with her husband, the same guy who never missed a chance to trash my career. About 45 minutes later, everything started unraveling. Name's Robin Callahan. I'm 33, an independent photographer living in Boulder, Colorado. I built my business from the ground up, shooting weddings, capturing wildlife, doing magazine work, the kind of gigs that only pay off if you've got real skill. And I do. But to my wife's family, especially her mother Lydia, none of it ever seemed good enough. At every family dinner, her dad Frank would lean across the table and say, "How's that little photography hobby going?" His voice always dripping with judgment. He was the type who thought success was measured in square footage and stock options, an investment banker to the bone. Sunday dinners at their place never changed. Lydia would dote on Claire like she was still a teenager, and Frank would grill me about my income like I was interviewing for a loan. Claire would give my hand a gentle squeeze under the table, her way of apologizing without saying a word. That week, I'd been up in Wyoming for a wildlife assignment, knee-deep in snow photographing bison for National Geographic. I was running on fumes, but Claire insisted we had to show up for her mom's birthday dinner. Just a couple hours, she told me, like that made it easier. I should have trusted that uneasy feeling in my gut when Lydia pulled me aside in the kitchen. She kept glancing over her shoulder before handing me that drink. Her fingers shook a little as she said, "I made it special, just for you." Something about it felt off. I just didn't realize how far off it really was. Claire and I met 6 years ago at an art show where my photography was on display. She was wrapping up her master's in environmental science, and I was finally starting to get noticed for my work. We hit it off right away. She saw what photography meant to me, and I admired how fiercely she cared about the planet. Her parents, though, were a different story. From day one, Frank made it crystal clear he'd pictured someone else for his daughter, someone with a steady desk job, a retirement plan, a company car. Basically, a clone of himself. Lydia was more subtle with her disapproval. She'd compliment my photos but follow it up with questions about when I'd get a real job. She'd invite me to family events but introduce me as the photographer, never as her son-in-law. I spent years trying to earn their approval. I'd bring nice bottles of wine to dinner, show them my published spreads, name-drop big clients. But it didn't matter. In their eyes, I was just some phase their daughter would eventually grow out of. Last Christmas, I overheard Lydia on the phone say, "Claire could have married Daniel, you know, the orthopedic surgeon with family money, but she picked the creative one." She said creative like it was a condition you should medicate. Frank didn't sugarcoat anything either. When Claire and I told them we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside and said, "Kids aren't cheap, son. Maybe think about getting a real job before you bring one into the world." I never shared those moments with Claire. She loved her parents, flaws and all, and I didn't want to put her in the middle. So I smiled when I had to, gave Frank a firm handshake every time, complimented Lydia's cooking, and kept my thoughts to myself. Still, the warning signs were there. Lydia would always ask Claire to join her in the kitchen right after I mentioned something going well in my career. She'd accidentally leave me out of family photos. And there was that time Frank brought up therapy for Claire's impulsive decisions while staring directly at me. I brushed it all off, thinking that eventually they'd come around. But I was wrong. The Friday of Lydia's birthday dinner, I came back from Wyoming windburned and worn out, with a memory card full of photos that would cover our mortgage for a quarter of the year. I was dead tired, but I still showered, threw on a clean button-down, and drove us to their fancy colonial home in the upscale part of town. Dinner started out like usual. Frank went on about a big financial deal he closed. Lydia fussed over the napkins and candles like we were dining with royalty. Claire's brother Lucas and his wife Emma made polite small talk. I sipped my beer and watched the clock, counting down the minutes. Then, after we finished the main course, Lydia announced she'd made her signature sangria for dessert. She headed back to the kitchen, and I offered to help bring out the glasses. There were 2 glasses sitting off to the side, separate from the rest. As I walked into the kitchen, I caught Lydia slipping something from a tiny vial into one of them. It wasn't some garnish or splash of flavor. It was clear, odorless, and definitely not part of any cocktail recipe. The second she heard me step in, she quickly stashed the vial like nothing had happened. "Oh, Robin, don't worry, I've got it," she chirped, way too cheerfully. "This one's just for you, my own little recipe for my favorite son-in-law." My stomach nodded. There was a faint shimmer on the surface of that drink, something you wouldn't notice unless the light hit it just right. Let me give you a hand with these, I offered, calmly taking both glasses from the counter. Back in the dining room, Frank barely looked up from his phone as I approached. Sangria time, I said casually, placing the tampered glass in front of him instead of drinking it myself. I passed on the wine, claiming I was sticking with water to go with dessert. About 45 minutes later, Frank looked like death, his face pale and glossy with sweat as he bolted toward the bathroom. The awful noises coming from behind that door echoed through the entire house. Across the table, I watched Lydia's face go white. When her eyes locked on mine, we both knew. She had tried to poison me, and now she knew I was fully aware of it. I didn't say a word, didn't accuse her, didn't raise my voice. I just kept eating my slice of chocolate cake while Claire jumped up to check on her dad. The whole place erupted into chaos, Frank insisting it was some kind of food poisoning, Lydia stumbling through excuses about bad shellfish. Meanwhile, I quietly slipped the untouched glass she had prepared for me into my coat pocket. Something changed in me right then. It wasn't rage boiling over. It was something colder focused. I wasn't going to let this go, but I also wasn't going to handle it on their terms. No yelling, no drama. They were going to see exactly who they were. That Monday, I brought the glass to Trent, an old client of mine who now runs a toxicology lab. Is this personal or business? He asked after I explained what I needed. Family issue, I said flatly. 3 days passed before he got back to me. Robin, he said over the phone, that drink had benzodiazepines in it. Not enough to kill someone, but more than enough to knock you out for hours, maybe even wipe some memories. Where'd you get this? He asked. I thanked him, asked for a written report, and ignored the question. That night, I told Claire I was skipping Sunday dinners for a while. Said I needed to focus on an upcoming gallery exhibition. She looked a little let down, but she got it. I didn't bring up the toxicology report. Not yet. I needed more to go on. Over the next couple of weeks, I started digging. Turns out Lydia had been prescribed Xanax by 3 different doctors. And not only that, she'd been doubling or tripling her dosage for years. There were whispers about her around town too, odd behavior at parties, jewelry disappearing at her country club, stories that her family worked hard to keep quiet. I gathered everything, prescription records, gossip, and the report, and waited for the right time. That moment came when Claire told me her mom needed some new photos for a social media profile. She specifically asked if you could take them, Claire said, clearly surprised. I agreed without hesitation. That Saturday, I showed up at their house alone, camera bag over my shoulder, and an envelope sealed tight in my hand. Lydia was already dressed up, makeup flawless, looking like she was ready for a magazine cover. Frank's at the office, she said, waving a manicured hand like it didn't matter. Before we get started, I said calmly, I think you should take a look at this. I handed her the envelope. Inside was the toxicology report, along with printed copies of her multiple prescriptions. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. This is ridiculous, she whispered. I would never. We both know exactly what happened, I said, cutting her off. What I don't know is why you did it. Her face hardened like stone. You're not good enough for my daughter. You never have been. A real man offers stability, not pictures. And drugging her husband, that's her definition of stability? I kept my voice steady. It wasn't supposed to hurt you, she snapped. Just make you sick enough to miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been going on about. So Claire could see how unreliable you really are. I let her words settle. Here's how this is going to go, I said. You're going to tell Frank exactly what you did. Then, starting today, the both of you are going to treat me with respect. Not because you suddenly believe I deserve it, but because the alternative is Claire finding out who her parents really are. Lydia let out a short, sharp laugh, but there was no weight behind it. She'll never believe you over us, she said. I picked up my camera bag and slung it over my shoulder. Maybe not, I said quietly, then walked out the door. But she'll believe the toxicology report, the prescriptions, the neighbors you've driven away. You willing to risk your relationship with your daughter on that? I walked out without taking a single photo. That night, Lydia called Claire in tears, spinning some story about how I'd been aggressive and inappropriate during our little photo session. She said I'd threatened her, that I was hostile and cruel. When Claire confronted me, I couldn't keep the truth hidden anymore. I laid it all out, every last piece. The lab results. The overlapping prescriptions. Even years' worth of text messages from her mother, some of them cold, others openly hostile. My mom wouldn't do something like this, Claire kept saying, but I could tell she didn't fully believe her own words. The next day, she went to see her parents face to face. I didn't go. When she came home later, her eyes were swollen, red from crying. My dad says it's all just a misunderstanding, she said quietly. That you're trying to stir things up because you're insecure about your career. I didn't argue. Just gave a small nod. I'd expected this reaction. What do you think? I asked gently. She didn't reply. She just climbed into bed, turned her back to me, and pulled the covers up. I'd finally stood up for myself, but somehow, I was the one cast as the villain. And they had managed to twist things so hard, the doubt had settled in Claire's mind. For 2 weeks, she barely said a word to me. She kept visiting her parents alone, and every time she came back, her eyes were puffy and her silence deeper. I buried myself in work, spending hours in my studio, editing, planning, anything to distract me while I waited for the storm to move on. Then a package showed up at the door. No return address. Just my name scribbled on the top in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a small USB drive and a folded note. You should see this. Signed, Emma David's wife. I plugged it into my laptop. The files were home security footage from Lydia and Frank's house. The timestamps were from the night of the birthday dinner. There was Lydia in the kitchen, clearly pouring something into a drink. Then me, entering and picking up the glasses. Then Frank, sipping from the one she had tampered with. But that wasn't all. There were more clips, footage from later that same night, after we'd gone. Lydia was yelling at Frank, furious. You drank the wrong one, she shouted. And Frank shouted back, this isn't the first time you've pulled something like this. I watched the whole thing 3 times. Not just confirmation of what Lydia had done, but evidence that this wasn't the first incident. Frank knew. The next clip was dated 2 days later. They were arguing again, this time in the living room. He knows what you did, Frank said. So what? Lydia replied, completely unfazed. It's his word against mine. Claire will never take his side over ours. And if she does, she's not the daughter I raised. Her voice was ice. Don't worry, she added. I've already started feeding her doubts. Little things about their marriage. By the time I'm through, she'll be filing for divorce and think it was her own idea. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a long, calculated campaign, an effort to control Claire's entire life and isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their mold. They'd been doing it for years. I called Emma right away. Why did you send me this? I asked. Because they did the same thing to me when I married Lucas, she said softly. They tried to wreck our marriage for 2 years. Told him I wasn't good enough. Nearly succeeded. Why didn't you ever tell us? Lucas doesn't know, she admitted. He idolizes his dad. Believes every word that comes out of his mouth. I tried to warn him, but he just called me paranoid. I couldn't let them do it to you too. The very next day, I got a text from Frank. We should talk. Man to man. No wives. We met at his country club, in some private lounge tucked away from the main crowd. He was already sitting down with a bourbon in hand when I arrived. Robin, he started, all smooth and casual. Families are complicated. My wife, she's intense, protective, but her heart's in the right place. Does her heart include drugging people now? I asked. He just waved a dismissive hand. It was a mix-up. Lydia takes medication for anxiety. She probably just confused the drinks. I have the footage, Frank. His whole face changed, froze solid, cold, and calculating. What do you want? He asked, voice suddenly hard. Money? Is that what this is really about? I always figured you married Claire for the paycheck. I want you both to stay out of our lives, I said. Stop trying to convince Claire I'm some deadbeat. Stop meddling in our marriage. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. You really think you're the first outsider we've had to deal with? Guys like you come around all the time, thinking they can latch onto what we've built. He chuckled. She always comes home. Claire always comes back where she belongs. Then he dropped a name that hit like a brick. Ask her about Daniel. Or the guy before you. My mouth went dry. What do you mean? Claire was engaged once, before you, he said, grinning like a man holding a royal flush. Real nice guy? A doctor. But his family wasn't good enough. Took us 6 months to open her eyes. She dumped him, came home sobbing. Daddy made it better. He leaned back, still smiling. History repeats, son. On the drive home, I called Claire's old college roommate, Emily. Do you remember someone named Daniel? I asked. Oh God, she said immediately. That whole thing was awful. He was perfect for her. But her parents hated him. They convinced her he was cheating, planted fake evidence. By the time he tried to explain, it was too late. She didn't trust him anymore. Suddenly, the full picture snapped into focus. This had never been about me. It was about control. Complete, suffocating control. And they'd been doing it to her all along. I didn't confront Claire right away. Instead, I went quiet and started pulling together every shred of proof I could get my hands on. I tracked down Daniel, her ex-fiancé. At first, he didn't want to talk, but once I laid out the situation, he came around. He sent me old emails, conversations between him and Claire, showing exactly how her parents had chipped away at their relationship. I reached out to some of her old friends too. Guys she used to date, women she used to trust, people who had slowly drifted out of her life. A pattern came into focus. Anyone who encouraged Claire to stand on her own eventually got cut off. Emma gave me more footage, security camera clips of Lydia and Frank casually talking about their plan. Once they're divorced, we'll get her to move back home, Frank said in one video. She can run the foundation. Meet the right kind of men. I dumped everything onto a flash drive. Then I invited Lucas and Emma over for dinner, but didn't tell Claire what was coming. After dessert, I hooked up my laptop to the TV and turned to them. There's something you both need to see. For the next hour, we sat there watching the footage. Claire didn't move. Her face had gone pale. Lucas just kept shaking his head, mumbling, "That's not my parents. That can't be them." When it ended, Claire turned toward me, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed you to see it yourself," I said. "Not just what they did to me, but everything they've been doing to you your whole life." Lucas stood up, angry now. "This is crap. You edited these. My parents wouldn't do this." Emma gently placed her hand on his arm. "They did the same thing to us, Lucas," she said quietly. "Why do you think they suddenly accepted me after I gave birth to Paul? A grandchild gave them power." Lucas's face drained of color. "You never told me." "I tried," she whispered. "But you wouldn't hear it." That night, Claire climbed into bed beside me and lay there in silence for a long time. Then, softly, she said, "I need time to process all this. But I believe you. And I'm sorry I doubted you." The next morning, Lydia called. Claire put her on speaker. "Darling," Lydia said in her overly sweet voice, "I've been thinking. Maybe you should come stay with us for a bit. Your father and I are worried." Sometimes a little space gives clarity. Claire cut her off. "Mom," she said firmly, "I've seen the videos." Silence on the line. "What videos?" Lydia finally asked. "The ones showing you drugging Robin's drink. The ones where you and Dad are planning how to break up my marriage." Another long pause. "Claire, whatever he's shown you, it's been doctored. Robin's always been jealous of our family." "Stop," Claire snapped. "We're all coming over tonight. Me, Robin, Lucas, Emma. We're going to talk. As a family. And this time, no more lies." After the call, she looked at me. "They're going to deny everything. They'll flip the script and make you the bad guy." I nodded. "I know. So what's our plan?" she asked. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "I think it's time your parents met the real me. Not just the guy who takes photos, but the man who knows how to tell a story." That evening, we pulled up to Frank and Lydia's place. I brought my full camera rig. Lucas and Emma were already there, stiff and silent in the living room. Frank looked calm, like he had it all under control. "I understand there's been a bit of a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "No misunderstanding," I said, unpacking my tripod. "I'm filming this for the family archives." Lydia immediately protested. "This is private family business." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'm family, no matter how hard you've tried to erase that." For the next 2 hours, we laid out everything. The spiked drink, the emotional manipulation, Daniel, the exes, the years of carefully orchestrated control. Frank and Lydia denied every accusation. They called me unstable, said I was twisting facts. But with each denial, I played another clip, showed another email. Their excuses got thinner, their faces paler. Eventually, Claire stood up. "I love you both," she said, voice trembling. "You're my parents. But what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore." Lucas chimed in, quieter but resolute. "We're adults. We choose our partners, our futures." Lydia burst into tears, not the kind that come from regret, but from losing control. Frank just looked stunned, like he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that his children were no longer under his thumb. As we got ready to leave, I pulled a USB drive from my pocket and handed it to him. "This has everything," I said as I handed Frank the USB. "The videos, the emails, the witness statements, it's all on there." He narrowed his eyes, suspicious. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not going to blow up your reputation by going public, I told him calmly. That would hurt Claire, and I would never do that to her. I paused before adding, but if you ever try to meddle in our marriage again, if you manipulate Claire or talk behind my back, copies of everything go out. Every member of your country club, your partners, your friends, they'll all get to see the real you. For the first time since I'd met him, Frank didn't look smug or dismissive. He looked at me with something close to respect. I underestimated you, he said. Yes, I replied. You did. 6 months went by. Claire and Lucas started therapy, working through the years of psychological warfare their parents had put them through. Lydia and Frank kept their distance. They sent a few polite texts here and there, but for the most part, they respected the boundaries we'd set. Then, just before Christmas, an invitation arrived. Dinner at their place. A fresh start, the card read. Claire wanted to go. They're still my parents, she said quietly. And maybe, they're trying. I agreed, but I wasn't foolish enough to think anything had really changed. When we showed up, everything looked picture perfect. Lydia had gone all out, a holiday spread straight from a magazine cover. Frank played the charming host, asking about my latest projects with what felt like genuine curiosity. After dinner, he invited me into his study. I've got a proposition for you, he said, pouring us each a scotch. I've been thinking about your career. Photography's treated you well, no doubt. But have you ever thought about branching out? He handed me the glass. I accepted it, but didn't drink. I could bring you into my firm. Junior partner track. The pay would be more than comfortable. I stared at him. Why would you offer me that? Your family, he said smoothly. And I respect the way you handled everything. You stood your ground, protected my daughter. That's what a real man does. I set the glass down untouched. I appreciate the gesture, but no. His smile tightened. Robin, be reasonable. This is an olive branch, a way to move forward. No, I said again. This is just another way to control me. He didn't like that. You can't stand that Claire loves me for who I am. And you can't buy me, Frank. The act dropped. His voice turned sharp. Don't be naive. Everyone has a price. I stood. That's exactly why you'll never really understand your daughter. Back in the dining room, Lydia was flipping through photo albums with Claire, her voice sweet and nostalgic. Look at these, she said. You were so happy when you lived at home. Claire looked up and met my eyes. She saw it in my face. Something had happened. I gave her a small nod. She rose to her feet. Mom, Dad, she said, her voice steady. We have something to share. Everyone turned toward her. Robin and I are having a baby. I'm 3 months pregnant. The look on their faces was pure shock. Lydia was the first to move. She rushed toward Claire, crying, hugging her like everything was fine. Frank followed more slowly. His eyes flicked between Claire and me. Congratulations, he said stiffly. Thank you, I replied. Then, lowering my voice so only he could hear. This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that. His jaw tightened, but he gave one small nod. He understood exactly what I meant. On the drive home, Claire reached for my hand. They'll never change, will they? She asked softly. No, I said honestly. But they'll have to accept that we have. 3 weeks later, we got a certified letter from Frank's lawyer. Inside was the deed to our house, the one we'd been renting, and a full set of legal documents creating a trust fund for our unborn child. No letter. No explanation. No conditions. Just a clean transfer of assets, final and binding. It wasn't an apology. Frank didn't do apologies. But it was a statement, in his own way. We'd won. Our daughter was born that summer. We named her Eliza, after my grandmother. When Lydia and Frank came to visit us at the hospital, they brought gifts and stayed polite. They doted on the baby, took a few pictures, then left quietly, no unsolicited parenting advice, no backhanded comments about finances. As the months went on, something like balance began to settle in. They never said they were sorry for the past, but they also stopped trying to steer Claire's life or sabotage my work. One evening, I was editing photos in my studio when Claire walked in holding Eliza. My mom called, she said. She wants us to come for Christmas. I looked up from the screen. What do you want to do? She thought for a moment. I think we should go, she answered. But on our terms. We stay at a hotel, not at their house. We leave when we're ready. And no one tells us how to raise our daughter. I nodded. Sounds fair. She sat beside me, gently rocking Eliza. You know, she said, for the longest time, I thought being successful meant making my parents proud. Meeting their expectations. Living up to what they wanted. She glanced down at our baby girl, then back at me. But now I know success means something else. It's about making choices I believe in, standing beside the people I love. 2 weeks before Christmas, another envelope arrived, this one from Frank. Inside was a glossy brochure, his company's annual report. Page after page featured my photography, landscapes, portraits, architectural shots. The same work I'd done without his help, without his approval. Tucked inside was a short note. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." Gee, it wasn't a truce. It wasn't some heartfelt moment of forgiveness. But it was something. Maybe respect. Maybe just recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that I'd built something real without needing his blessing. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood this wasn't about gratitude. It was about understanding the new ground rules, the new version of reality. That spring, I opened my first gallery in downtown Boulder. At the grand opening, Claire stood next to me, Eliza on her hip. My parents flew out from Washington State. The space buzzed with clients, friends, and art lovers admiring the images I'd taken over the years. Lydia and Frank showed up toward the end of the night. They didn't stay long. Lydia held Eliza briefly, under Claire's steady eye. Frank shook my hand, looked around the gallery, and gave a small nod toward the photos. He didn't offer a single suggestion, just approval, quiet and unspoken. Later, as we were locking up, Claire turned to me. "Do you think they've changed?" she asked. I thought about it. "No," I said after a pause. "But they finally accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes, that's enough." That night, we sat out on the porch watching stars scatter across the Colorado sky. Eliza was upstairs asleep in her crib, and I realized something I hadn't fully put into words before. I didn't win by outplaying Frank and Lydia at their own game. I won because I refused to play it at all. I stood my ground, protected what mattered, built a life on my own terms, not through schemes or manipulation now, but through honesty, resilience, and quiet determination. And in the end, that was the best revenge I could have asked for. Living well, with the family I love right there beside me.